Well, welcome to another edition of Princeton Remembers. This is a segment by which we interview interesting people and learn their oral history. We're coming to you from the Princeton Museum, which is downtown Princeton, BC, and we're on the unceded territories of the Upper Similkameen Indian Band. I'm Bob Long, your host, and here we have our friend George Elliott.
Yes.
Who's going to give us some of his wise stories to tell and some recounting
Might even tell
of
you a
history.
lie.
Well, we do take the odd lie too.
Right on.
But we can research it later. But
Good luck with that.
let's go right back to the very beginning, George. When and where were you born, and what was happening soon after you were born? Can you
My
recall?
beginnings.
Yeah.
Well, I've always kept it a secret from where I'm from, so you're going to actually get the exclusive. I've always said that I grew up in Kelowna and that I was from Kelowna, but I'm originally from Edmonton, Alberta. I was born in Alberta in 1960. My family moved to Kelowna in 1968. My father and mother took the family, which would be myself and my younger brother, to Kelowna for a holiday in 1966. And if I remember correctly, the story, I don't remember the actual trip, but if I remember the story correctly, it was a wrong turn.
Oh.
And he ended up in the Okanagan Valley and fell in love with it. My father originally from Scotland, and I guess the mountainside that kind of framed the valley reminded him of home.
Okay.
And so his plan was to eventually settle the family in the Okanagan, and Kelowna is where we ended up.
Well, let's go back to Edmonton then. So you
Sure.
were born in Edmonton, and you were about 6 years old when this trip
the
was
first
made.
trip would have been about
So
6.
what was your family up to there then? What was your dad doing, for example?
My father had a lot of different jobs. I did some research after he passed away in 1990 and found that he never really held any job for any real length of time. But for the longest time, just prior to us moving, he was a commissionaire. And worked for the Alberta Government Telephone Office as a commissionaire. And so I remember that. I have a picture of him on the job that's next to my bed, and I remember the day that photo was taken. So we're probably talking mid-60s when that photo was taken.
So a holiday trip to British Columbia was the beginning of a love affair for living in BC. So when your family moved here then,
Yep.
What was your father up to then, and what was the business?
He had retired. He had completely
Okay.
retired. Again, didn't know until after he passed away that he was actually born in 1900. So when we moved in 1968, he would have been 68.
Sure, yeah.
And so, yeah, we settled in Kelowna. I did all my formal schooling there. Grew up there, got into my first career in Kelowna. Kelowna, I spent most of my life in Kelowna. Now, technically, if you do the math, more than half of my life has been spent in Princeton now, but up until then, I'd grown up in Kelowna.
So high school or elementary school there?
High school, elementary school, I started grade 3, I believe, in Kelowna, and then right on up to graduation.
And some of your memories from being in Kelowna, were you involved in sports activities, volunteering?
Yeah, I got introduced to running and track and field, so I got interested in those kind of things. So running was something that I got into pretty quick and was something I've done off and on for several years. Later in my life when I moved to Penticton, and we'll probably get to that part, I ran some road races and did some jogging and things like that. So running's always been kind of part of my history from school.
Yeah. So Kelowna until you were what age, and then you moved from Kelowna to?
Well, I got into my first career, which was broadcasting, when I was in Kelowna. So I started that in the year I graduated from high school in 1978, and worked at 2 radio stations in Kelowna. And then in July of 1981, I moved to Penticton to work part-time at a radio station there, just to stay in the business.
Now let's go back to that. So the radio stations then probably AM,
Yep.
were they? And,
AM and FM, actually. Yep.
And what kind of station was that? This is in Kelowna now.
Yeah, my first station in Kelowna was Chim FM, and it was kind of a classical music, middle of the road kind of format. At the time, the CRTC, Canadian Radio Television Communications Commission, had very strict rules and regulations on FM radio. So FM, you had to do a lot of cultural things, and so we did a lot of interviews and things like that. So that was my start was with Chim FM, and then I went across the hallway, which was technically across the hallway in the same building, to CKOV, which was a country station at the time. And I did evenings and I did overnights, those kind of shifts, and then ended up going to Penticton to further my career.
And so the station in Penticton, what was its format?
Well, as it turns out, there were 3 stations in Penticton at the time, and in the 5.5 years I worked in Penticton, I eventually did all 3 of those stations. The FM station I started at was CKOR FM, and at that time it was very similar to CHIM in Kelowna. FM stations in Canada, again, like I said at that time, had to have a lot of spoken word content and cultural content. The AM station, CKOK at the time, was a rock station in the shift I had, middle of the road during the day. So I was the rock jock, so that was kind of cool. And then I ended up working at CIGV FM for a very short period of time, and that was a country station. And so I did that for like 6 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks, and then got hired back by CKOK.
It's kind of amazing that when I think back that most towns had a radio station or 2, and that's a little bit gone by the wayside now, hasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to be working in the business when independently owned, family-owned radio stations were kind of the norm. Now it's big, giant corporate entities, and it's basically the same cookie-cutter format from one station to the other. You go up and down the dial, and you hear the same thing everywhere you go.
And the cultural aspect, maybe that's gone too.
Well, the CRTC did lighten its rules for the FM stations, so yeah, those things changed as well.
So you've now come to Penticton.
Yep.
And what other activities did you find yourself involved with there besides radio?
Or
branching out from radio even?
Yeah, mostly just got involved in a lot of social activities. The radio station I worked at in Penticton put us on location a lot, so I did a lot of on location broadcasting, grand openings, ribbon cuttings. The Peach Festival in Penticton was a very big deal, so we would be sitting there and doing cut-ins from there. Same with the Square Dance Jamboree that was held the week before, the week after Peach Fest. Again, found myself in the news van on location doing these kind of things and sending in reports back to the studio. I enjoyed that. That was fun. I think that taught me how to improvise, because there were many interviews that I did, man on the street interviews I did in Penticton where there was nobody on the street. I was just talking to myself. So I learned very quickly how to improvise and cover up some of that stuff.
Right.
I remember going to the Square Dance Jamboree at an allotted time to capture some of the flavor of the event, and I pull into this spot, and I'm talking mid-'80s, and there's nobody there. I must have either had the wrong time or the wrong venue. So out of the van I get, and I stand there with the microphone, and I did my 2 or 3 cut-ins for that hour, made it sound like it was the most popular thing going on. And that's what you end up doing, right? Radio was fun for that in those days because it was unscripted, and you could improvise if you had to, right?
Yeah, boy, that would be great. And that connection with the community that you had, being a local station, followed you through to other. I think you got involved with print at some point too. Then.
Well, that's not until I got into Princeton.
Oh, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, okay,
so,
all right.
Let's finish the story of Penticton. How long were you there then?
5.5 years. I did the evening shift and moved up to do the afternoon shift for a period of time. As I said, I started in Penticton July '81. I left Penticton in October of '86, and had a job offer here in Princeton at the radio station. The offer here included assistant manager position, so it was a climb up the ladder. Included advertising, sales, news reporting, basically a lot of things that I'd never done before. So I thought, well, this is a really good opportunity if I plan on going further in the career, is to take this position and learn a lot more things that I just didn't have access to.
So the station here in Princeton, what was it called and how long it had been around?
It had been on the air, I think, from the '70s, and it was just a small little repeater, so there was a few hours each day that it broadcast local programming.
AM or FM?
Yes, it was AM. CKRP was the call letters when I got here, and WKRP was a popular television program at the time. So during my tenure at the radio station here, I would use the slogan that you're listening to the mighty KRP as they did on the TV show. So did that as kind of my homage to that very well-written and amusing television program. But I learned a lot. It was great to get hands-on. I learned how to do sales, like I said. I did a lot of reporting, attended a gazillion meetings, and I still do. I think that might have had something to do with my interest in becoming a volunteer and doing a lot of volunteer work, seeing how organizations run, and not because I'm any better than anyone at the table, but learning some of the history of some of these groups, it just made sense to me to maybe get involved and see if I can offer some help and be of use in some way. But the radio station was a great deal. It was a lot of fun. It closed in April 1999 when a corporate entity bought it and then turned it into a stick. That's what we call them, just a repeater stick with programming fed in from somewhere else. And they shut down the local studio, and that was it. My radio career had come to a screeching halt.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's surely missed in many towns now because it's such almost the glue that can hold a community together, right?
Yeah, well, I can tell you one of the things that stands out for me from the time that I was doing the radio here locally was November 1995 when we had a flood. And I stayed on air live till midnight that night with all sorts of reports and live updates. I had a member of the town council in the studio with me, and we were fielding questions and trying to get emergency information out, and that was the only way we could do it. The only other option I had was to do cut-ins through the feed in Penticton, and nothing against the company, but they were not keen on doing that, and so I said, fine. I shut off the feed, and I went on live and did that right till midnight that night. And I think we helped some people and also kind of calmed them down and just let them know that there was a local voice that was kind of, feeling it out with them and trying to figure it out as we all did at the same time. And it was I think local radio at that time, if I never understood the importance of local radio, that night would have done it for me.
For sure. I mean, there was an absolute pertinence in live broadcasting, which today is difficult to connect. I mean,
That's exactly right.
You listen to, you don't know how much of it is coming from head office or from pre-recorded and
That's
so
right.
forth. Yeah.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Well, it's a shame that there isn't a station here any longer, but what happened after that? Where did your career move you to, or your activities?
I spent just over a year unemployed, trying to figure out what I was going to do. Wasn't too sure what my plan was. I had worked many hours up to that point. I felt kind of guilty collecting EI of all things, until a friend of mine said to me, George, you've paid into this all your life. Maybe this is the only time you'll ever claim from it, so take advantage of it. And I thought, that's actually not a bad thought. So I received a small severance package from the radio station. I'd worked there for 12 years, and so I received a small severance package, one that actually annoyed me as to how small it was, but that's just me. Anyway, regardless, went on EI, spent a year on EI, wasn't sure what I was going to do, and one day I got approached by the owners of a local newspaper on the street, and they said, what are you doing tomorrow? We'd like to talk to you about something. And I thought, maybe they want me to do some reporting for them. That'd be kind of cool. So I went into their office the following day. This is in July of 2000, and they offered me a job as their advertising sales manager.
Now, this is the local newspaper at that time.
A local newspaper. We had two at the time. There was a locally owned newspaper at the time, an independent. And so they approached me and hired me right there as their advertising sales manager.
That's a challenging job, selling advertising, isn't it?
The biggest challenge to me at that time was computers, because I had zero computer experience. And so I was supposed to sell the ads and build the ads on a computer using graphic programs I'd never seen before in my life. They were going to spend quite a bit of time bringing me up to speed on the computers, and I got pretty bored with that. And I remember saying to one of them, I said, why don't you just give me a package I can take on the street and sell? And the argument was, well, you're not ready yet. And I said, oh, come on, just let me go out and sell something. And so they gave me a couple things to go out and sell, and because I had an extensive client list from the radio station, up till a year prior to that, I thought, well, I'll just go to some of my old clients and see what I can do. And I was gone part of the afternoon. I came back to the newspaper office with a bunch of new sales, and the two principals at the time looked at each other and said, you could learn the computer later. and it kind of went from there.
Because I don't know if the viewers know, but you can explain to us how that works in a newspaper, because it depending on, I believe, how much advertising you can sell depends on what size of the paper is, which depends how much news you can get in there.
To a point, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
At the time, we had a set size for the paper, and yeah, so much space set aside for advertising. There's no doubt about that. And the advertising paid for the paper. That's essentially it. I mean, you don't get funding in any other source.
Right.
It's advertising that pays for the business. And if you have a really light week of advertising, sometimes the paper's a little skinnier. And if it isn't, you know your paycheck's going to be a little skinnier regardless, right? And maybe we can't afford to keep the heat on today or whatever, right? I mean, you know, that's a bit of an extreme, but that gives you an idea of some of the decisions that you have to make based on, so what's the revenue stream this month? Maybe we won't be going out for lunch every day this week or whatever, right?
So did you write for the paper as well?
I eventually got to do some reporting. They asked me to do some stringing, so I ended up on the road doing some stringing. I covered the Karamias area for some news and established some contacts there, sold some advertising there as well. And basically, because I was a creative writer from the past in my youth, they knew I had some skills, and I was writing news in the radio station prior to that, so they knew I could handle the news writing part. And so, yeah, I became a reporter and started covering some meetings for them. It was a lot like the radio station, because I ended up wearing a lot of hats at the newspaper as well, which I really enjoyed. I had no problem with that. I mean, they taught me how to do layout on the pages, so I was laying out pages, I was writing, I was taking photos, I was converting the photos so I can actually print them out and put them on the pages. And this is before we were laying the paper out on computer. This was actually done on paper, right? Wax paper on a form.
Right.
About this size, right? So we were actually laying the pages out manually. And then in the time I was there, we converted to computer, and then we started to actually lay the pages out on computer.
Yeah, because you had to turn the pictures into halftones in those in the old days.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's go back in time a moment, because now
Okay.
we're talking about your writing. So
Sure.
even though you told us about your radio career,
Sure.
were you writing soon after when you left high school? Did you start doing some creative writing at that point?
Yeah, I did. I started actually writing poetry as a kid, and have written well over 1,200 different poems. Published one volume at one point. Then got into short stories, and I did a bunch of short stories, and then I started writing other stuff. I currently have 16 titles that I've self-published. The last 6 or 7 are ebooks on Amazon. But yeah, you know, I mean, it just, you know, I'd sit down and I'd bang off 100,000 words or whatever it took to finish something over the course of a few weeks. And yeah, you know, I just finished, you know, whatever the topic was. The last ebook I published was 2 years ago, and it was on how to become a podcaster. You know, so I basically laid it out, and I think that's like I think it was a 15,000 word piece that I did there. And I laid out how, because I was podcasting myself, so I basically explained how I got into it, how I saved money, and the goal was how to be a podcaster for under $100. And so I explained my story, and I did, you know, kind of went from there. And
so were you writing in high school? Maybe involved with this?
Yeah, I was writing in high school. I
annual?
wasn't in the high school newspaper, but I was writing in high school. Yeah.
And through your teens and early 20s, you were writing at the same time as you were broadcasting?
Yeah, for sure. It was mostly poetry at that time. But then, like I said, I eventually shifted to short stories, and I actually am now a full-time freelance writer. That's actually what I do as a career, but I write web content for internet website owners in various parts of the world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that was really handy. Now, was going back to the newspaper days, so having those skills behind you must have really helped you with the newspaper.
Yeah, you know, I never got rich at anything I've done, and that's okay, because I think every step I've taken, I'm a firm believer that every step you take prepares you for the next step. So, you know, I did radio, you know, success and gain, a little bit of space, and then, you know, a couple of failures, a little more success, a little more failure, and then newspaper, you know, some success, failure, success, failure. You learn from the failures. Now freelance writing, so success, failure, success, failure. But every step has prepared me for where I end up.
Now, the paper that you worked for in the beginning, you said Karamias. So did it cover quite a large geographical area?
Yeah, it was called the Similkameen News Leader.
Okay.
And yeah, it was basically the Similkameen Valley was what we focused on. So, for example, if there was a big story that happened in Kelowna or Penticton or Kamloops or Vancouver, you wouldn't see it in our paper. We just focused entirely on
Local
small
news.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I used to make fun about it, but I mean it sincerely. You know, Little Billy's win at the spelling bee could be a front page story in our paper because that's big news to Little Billy and Billy's family. And I'm also thinking, okay, so Little Billy's family's going to buy the paper, maybe his grandparents, maybe a couple of his friends. Now you're selling papers, right? Because Little Billy's on the front page, you know, and like I said, it's not hard news, but when you're a small community-based paper, you don't need hard news. You just need to show the story of what's going on in your community at that time.
And Billy would be an inspiration to other Billies.
Let's
right?
hope.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
and Sally's, right?
Yeah.
You know, so not just the Billies, but also the
Yeah.
Sally's. So, yeah.
So how long were you with the newspaper, and how did that progress? Because you started, what was the year again? You were
it
saying
was July of
2000.
2000
Yeah.
I started at the paper. I actually bought it
Oh,
in February 2004.
you loved the company so much you bought it.
Well, they were grooming me to buy it, actually. That was kind of one of the original reasons for hiring me, was that I was going to be groomed to eventually take the paper over. So I took it over financially and everything, bought it in February 2004, and operated it until July 2016 when we ended up actually closing the doors. It's internet and you know, cost of business and stuff, we just couldn't keep up. It was, and advertising was kind of doing this, costs were doing this, and you know, they just weren't meeting, right?
Yeah, yeah. So you had it for a good period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It did published, I used to know the number, I think we published over 600 different editions, I forget now. I actually put it on the masthead once I figured it out. Every week I would put the number on just to remind me that, you know, we've been doing this for a little while.
Yeah, yeah. So what happened after, where did you move into after that, or what field?
Well, when things were starting to fail at the newspaper, I started looking at ways to try to keep my bills intact, and I thought freelancing would be the way to go. And so I started researching that, and I eventually ended up finding a couple of opportunities related to freelance writing. So I was actually freelance writing 2.5 years before we shut the paper down. I wanted to kind of make sure I had some solid footing. And so basically what was a hobby, me doing some freelance writing on the side, turned into a new career. I was able to flip it into a career, and it's been doing well ever since.
Wow, great, very interesting. Now, what other involvements in Princeton? Because you're for sure a Princetonite.
Yeah. Well, I learned very early on that it's very important to give back to your community, and so I learned that in order to do that, you have to get involved in groups, and so volunteering's never been something I've shied away from. And I also learned early on, and this is going to sound egotistical, but I think it's effective if you're a leader, and I do believe I have leader qualities in me. If you're going to get involved, you have to get involved at the executive level, not just as someone in the background. So the majority of the groups I got involved in, I had executive positions. I was president of Racing Days, president of the PXA, vice president of the Chamber of Commerce, vice president of Princeton Crisis Association.
Whoa, this is a whole segment in itself.
Yeah, really. Vice president of the Princeton Museum Society. I was secretary of the Princeton Rotary Club. I was director of countless other groups. I had a resume this long. I actually kept track for a little while just to see. And I mean, those are just the ones off the top of my head. I'm sure there's a whole lot more that I've forgotten, or I was a director of the Okanagan College Board. Just the list just goes on and on and on. And I've never really had a problem with getting involved in the community. I get asked a lot to be president of the Granite Creek Preservation Society. I was one of the founding members of that. Anyway, where I was going was that I've been asked several times to be involved in groups because obviously people know that I have some some skills that I could bring to the table. And so I really enjoy doing that. I don't have a problem with doing those things. Of course, now that I'm on town council, that's kind of shifted my focus. And, I can't really sit on boards in that respect. I do sit on boards that have been appointed to by council, but I don't get elected to boards now, and to avoid a conflict of interest, right?
There can be a conflict.
Yeah.
But still, those organizations that you've mentioned are huge parts of community building. So.
Yeah, absolutely. To give you an idea of how my contribution was recognized locally, the Rotary Club in November of 2016 presented me with a Paul Harris Fellowship.
Oh, okay.
So for those who don't know what that is, that's the highest honor that Rotary International gives to a community leader. And it doesn't always have to be a member of that group. It's just someone in their community, and they honor them with this fellowship. So I'm in a pretty elite group, if you really want to put it that way. I don't think about it that much, but it's nice to know that your contribution's recognized.
Now you mentioned you were very quick in mentioning some of the organizations, but you said something about a racing group, or
Yep.
So some of these activities are they still happening in Princeton?
Yeah,
or
some of the
them?
groups no longer exist.
Yeah,
The
that's
Racing
the
Days
sense I got.
Association was live horse racing that used to
Okay.
be a big deal here in Princeton. I ended up president of that for I think 9 years, and that's another thing too. Is when I got involved, it was a commitment that I didn't take lightly. It was not a 1 year or a one-term situation. I wanted to be, longer-term member because I wanted to see things finish. Right? If there were projects that we had on the table, I wanted to see them through. I was really good at delegating. I'm a firm believer of the committee structure. If you have a committee that you're going to assign to do some work, you let them do it, give them the power to do it, to make the decisions, and then come back to you with recommendations, right? And you have to trust them. Or why would people get involved if you don't trust them?
Empowering them is what you're saying.
Exactly
Yes.
right,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, you have to do that, for sure.
For sure. So are there any of those groups that we mentioned, the horse racing one, but other groups that maybe you would like to see come back? Or what's the status of some of them now?
Wow, that's a question I never really thought of. I think if I wanted anything to happen related to any of those groups, is I'd like to just see more people interested in volunteering, because that seems to be the issue, is a lot of people just don't understand the importance in volunteering. I'm not saying that it's not important, and I'm not saying that people's lives are not important, but there seems to be a shift of focus. I understand your time has value and your time is worth money, but sometimes doing the right thing involves not getting paid for it. Sometimes doing the right thing means actually just giving of yourself just because you can. If you have a talent that you can share, whatever that might be, then maybe you should share it, right?
Yeah, that's a really good philosophy. We had an interview earlier with Evelyn McCallum, and she was talking about some of her involvement with the community. And
very involved lady.
And here what you're saying is the same thing, that the community needs volunteers and people to do stuff for a community to be built.
Sure.
So you got to the ultimate committee when you ran for council, I guess.
Yeah. That actually, there's some history in my family in politics, which again is a big secret that you're going to hear right now.
Okay.
My grandfather was the mayor and at the time alderman prior to that of his hometown in Saskatchewan for decades.
Wow.
So there is some political history in my family. I ran for council once before in 1999, and I missed it by 24 votes. I've attended, prior to getting elected as a reporter, I attended more than 400 town council meetings, radio, and then eventually newspapers. So, I understood a lot of the timeline.
You knew how it was working or not working.
Yeah, pretty much knew how slow the wheels turned.
Yeah.
And not by fault of anybody other than the process. Sometimes it's slow to get things done, right? But I had a pretty good understanding of it, and so I threw my name in the hat. At the time, there were 16 of us running for 4 seats on council, and 3 people running for the mayor's seat. And I didn't really think I was going to have much of a chance with that many people running, but I didn't advertise, I didn't promote myself other than just online, and I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. I was a little nervous, and I was in the top 4 ballot numbers right from the very beginning. So I never lost ground. I got as high as the 3rd highest vote. I then dropped back down to 4 when the last ballot box was counted, but I got one of the 4 seats.
Mm-hmm. And you haven't regretted that?
Not at all, no.
Yeah.
I think, and it's really funny too, because you do need to have an alligator skin for this kind of thing, and my years in media basically gave me an alligator skin, right? I mean, you are up against a lot of criticism when you make good or bad decisions in the radio business and in the newspaper business. Came under fire a lot in the newspaper business. So town council was an easy one for me. It's like, you can complain to me all you want, but we're going to part as friends once I explain to you why this is the way it is, and hopefully you can accept my answer, and thank you for your feedback, and don't ever be shy about asking me something else again, because we're going to be friends when we part, and I think that's how it has to be, right?
Now, what plans do you have for the future? We won't maybe talk about the election, although this is a timeless interview. So
sure. I have announced that I'm seeking re-election, so we'll see how that goes. Yeah.
But where do you see the town going, aside from the political?
Where do I see the town
views,
going?
Where are we heading here in Princeton?
Well, I mean, the entire time I've lived here, I've always felt that we're on the edge of some really big growth, but there's always been hurdles that have gotten in the way of that. With the flood in November of 2021, that didn't help things any. It's really slowed down a lot of the progress. Housing issues have existed here for basically most of the time I've lived here. Infrastructure problems have always existed here since I've lived here, and I moved here in '86. Every election, those are the 2 issues you hear about more than anything else. And finally, you're starting to see some progress on both of those fronts. And it's not just because of this council doing it. It's just, I think, the timing and everything, there's a cycle. And I think we're finally at that point in the cycle where these things need to happen, or the community is going to suffer even greater negatives down the road.
It's a very popular place, I think. People are coming to Princeton all the time.
Sure.
So that's encouraging. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you wanted to highlight that we haven't covered?
Well, I mean, I could talk briefly about my health challenges, which have been really
if you don't
quite
mind,
significant.
All right.
Sure. In April of 2020, I was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. And I was told at the time that my heart function was down to 10%. And my cardiologist told me that they call that a death sentence. And I asked him why. And he says, typically people with 10% heart function give up and die. And so I said to him, well, I have 2 questions for you. Number 1, is it fixable? And number 2, what do I do to fix it? And his attitude totally changed, got me some literature on how to change a few things. I don't need to change that much because I don't drink and I don't smoke and I don't eat a lot of junk. So it was just, fine tuning a couple of things for me. And I'm now, as of this moment, at 35% heart function. So, things are going well. And then in February of this year, 2021, I had a tumor removed from one of my kidneys, which was discovered just by chance with a scan that was looking for something else. And I didn't find out till 2 weeks later that it was actually cancerous. But I don't have any follow-up other than scans to make sure that there's no reoccurrence. But for me, this term on council, with the flooding, the forest fires, the heat dome, pick all the bad things that have happened, for me, I've had a couple of personal challenges on top of that. And I'm not complaining. It's just, these things make you a little stronger. And, it just, as long as you have the right attitude to get through it, you get through it.
Well, that's excellent advice for everybody, isn't it? I can certainly tell by your enthusiasm that you're not going to be a guy that's going to get beaten down. That's for sure.
No. I've always been a glass half full kind of guy, so I think that's helped a lot. I just want to still be able to contribute as long as I'm healthy enough to keep contributing. That's my plan.
Excellent. Well, I sure have enjoyed our chat, and
I have too.
And I'm sure that the folks watching have gotten something out of it. here we are in the Princeton Museum, and there's the website princetonmuseum.org where you can log on, and there's an email too if you wanted to ask questions or get involved with the museum. Now, just before we go, you were involved. Tell us a bit more about your involvement of the museum before we sign off, because that's important.
Oh, wow. My involvement with the museum goes back actually several years. I was a volunteer. I used to sit in this museum long before it expanded to where it is now, the old, small, dark and dingy museum. I would sit on a Saturday afternoon and be a host, and I spent most of the day sitting by myself reading historic documents and things that I could find laying around the museum, because there was no visitors, or very few visitors at the time, and if there were, they were looking to use the washroom. That was about the extent of it, So when this expansion took place, it totally changed things, and I've always had an interest in local history. Some of the books I've published are based on local history, so I've always been really fascinated with the fact that there is so much local history here.
Right.
I mean, and this museum is, I'm going to sound biased, but this museum has such an immensely amazing collection of historic photos, and it's like everybody in Princeton who had a camera was out taking pictures of stuff, thinking, maybe 50 years from now, this might be a significant photo of something going on the main street that nobody's going to know about in 50 years, right? So, yeah, it's got an amazing extensive collection of photos for sure, and all sorts of other artifacts as well.
Well, with this segment, we're trying to expand its collection by collecting stories and experiences of people like you. So
hopefully, George, you didn't run out of tape.
No, we've got a big hard drive. But but you've been a great contributor in the community so many ways over the years, and now with this program, it's going to contribute to the future as well. So
excellent.
Thanks for your time, and thanks for watching, everyone, and have a good day.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Okay.